Okay, okay, great. So I'm gonna, even though we're still a smallish group and we don't know what happened to Janice, I'm gonna officially welcome everybody. And so nice to have an intimate local group, even though I am 7,000 miles away, in the land of our love. Someone asked me where I was today, and I said the MaTaRoT in my homeland. So that's where I am. But we are here together in this Zoom room in our December workshop with Rabbi Ben Rosen, who we're so thrilled to have, continuing our series on stories. What's the story? What's your story? And we're really thrilled that Ben has joined us today. Ben is relatively new to the Boston area. He is on the faculty and the clergy and whatever else they call it over there at Temple Bethlehem in Wellesley. And I've had the pleasure of meeting Ben earlier in this academic year, because we're working with Bethlehem on a PBL project. And pretty much at every single meeting, Ben would say, oh, that's like this narrative thing, or that's like this folktale thing. And I said, wow, you seem to know a lot about stories. And Ben shared with me that as part of his requirements for ordination, he submitted a collection of original and adapted Jewish folk tales, The Man Who Lived on Stories Alone, Tales from the Town of Sipor. So Jewish stories and storytelling continue to provide Ben with the foundation of much of what his teaching is all about in his rabbinate. And he's going to share with us today, hopefully something that will be a takeaway, that obviously some content for us as Jewish adult learners about stories and storytelling and where that fits in our tradition, but also we're going to have some fun with writing our own stories and storytelling. So with that, Rabbi Ben Rosen, I'm really thrilled that you're with us today. And you now have 53 minutes. It's all yours.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Marianne. I fell into, well, was ordained in May, the historic Cincinnati campus, and made my way out here to Wellesley. And when I got here, just so happened that they were like, oh, you're going to be, teaching and working with our 6th and 7th graders. And guess what? We built this whole new curriculum that's all based around Jewish storytelling. And I was like, wow, sold. All right, I'm in. And then Marion came in and quickly, connected, and so what we're going to do today is we're going to do this in 3 parts. I like to kind of give everyone a lay of the land, when I'm teaching. So we're going to start off, we're going to look at one of the most ancient examples of adaptation in Jewish storytelling. Okay. And when I say Jewish storytelling, I'm speaking incredibly broadly, right? Jewish storytelling includes Tanakh, it includes Mishnah, Midrash, folklore, right? When I say folklore, we're talking like, the wise men of Helm, the shtetl tales, the Golem of Prague, things like that. And we're also going to be talking about how these stories could not and have never existed or been born out of a vacuum, right? This is really kind of, if I had I guess if I had to put a label on it, this would be my anti-assimilation fear session, right? Because what I hope to show you is that our culture Jewish culture over thousands of years has always been made richer when it has come into contact with other cultures, adapted cultural norms, cultural myths, and turned them into Jewish stories. We have done this since the beginning of our people. So we're going to start off and we're going to look at how an ancient Babylonian creation myth maps onto the Genesis narrative, our own creation myth. We're then going to move, I'm going to give you an example of one of the stories that I adapted for myself during my capstone process. And then we're going to take a try at adapting one of the most famous American myths, George Washington and the Cherry Tree. So we're going to make our way through history, and we'll end hopefully with this kind of framework for you to take into your classrooms to be able to bring these stories, right, that are right at once universal and incredibly particular into a modern context. So I'm going to share my screen here. Let me make sure I find the right. Okay. I'll also be, I'm going to send all of these documents to Marian after, and hopefully those can go out to the group so that you can use this if you so choose. You have my full permission to use the materials. So, okay. 2 columns. On the left, we have Enuma Elish. Enuma Elish is a Babylonian creation myth. It means when on high. Okay, that's what Enuma Elish means. And originally, this story was found in Nineveh in an archaeological dig. A bunch of fragments of shards were put together to reveal a text. And at that point, it was dated to about 900 BCE. Okay. But over the century that followed, more archaeology would unveil fragments from even later of this story that indicate that it actually probably arose around the 13th century BCE, right? This is incredibly old. So old that you'll see that occasionally there will be like literal fragments of sentences, right? So we'll have to do a little work to piece it all together. So what we're going to do is we're going to go beat by beat. And as we're doing that, I'm going to ask, that we have some readers. And as we're going, we're going to see, just in very brief, it doesn't have to be flowery. We're just going to kind of write in the column. If we were to turn this into a Jewish story, what would we write? So we're going to go kind of box by box. So if I could get a volunteer to take this first bit of tablet 1. Yeah,
Sure.
Susie.
When on high, the heaven had not been named. Firm ground below had not been called by name. Naught but primordial Apsu, their begetter. And Tiamat, she who bore them all, their waters commingling as a single body. No need hut had been matted, no marsh land had appeared. When no gods whatever had been brought into being, uncalled by name, their destinies undetermined, then it was that the gods were formed within them.
Okay, thank you. So what's jumping out at you? Any similarities that you see in the text?
Well,
Anything that looks familiar?
certainly the issue of naming.
Okay. So we've got right there naming as a mode of creation. Excellent.
It reminds me of Breshit, the heavens and the ground, and there was light and darkness and separation.
Absolutely.
A little bit of Adam and Eve type of figures.
Ooh, okay. So we have Apsu, also known as Enki, right? So this is the tough part about studying ancient Near Eastern mythology and cultures is that over time, right, God's names would change based on who was kind of the primary guy at the time, right? So sometimes you'll see, and you'll actually see how the scribes, whoever was writing this down, sometimes made a little boo-boo, right? They accidentally used an old name for a god. So I'll point those out as we go. But right now we have Apsu and Tiamat. Okay. Apsu represents the best translation I could find is like groundwater, right? The water that's underneath the surface of the earth. And Tiamat represents the water that's on top, right? Tiamat is the mother figure, right? Apsu is the father figure in this case, right? So immediately off the bat, what do we need to change to make it a Jewish story?
There are multiple gods, no gods
Yes,
ever had been brought into being. And in Judaism, it's we are one God.
exactly. So, right, and we'll see when we take a look at Genesis, right? It's Yahweh, it's Adonai, it's El, it's one God, right? So immediately we have a theological issue in the text. But that doesn't mean that we can't keep all of this great narrative stuff, like went on high when the heaven had not been named, right? And there was just this primordial chaos, right? Beautiful, beautiful myth. So we're going to take some of that, right? And we're going to put it into Genesis. Now let's keep reading. Someone wants to take here from verse 10, and we're still in the first tablet, right? So there are ultimately 6 tablets are discovered that contain this story.
I guess I'll do it. Lachmu and Lachamu were formed and came into being. While they grew and increased in stature, Ansar and Kusar, who excelled them, were created. They prolonged their days, they multiplied their years. Anu, their son, could rival his father's. Anu, the son, equaled Ansar.
Mm-hmm.
Keep going.
Yes, please.
And Anu begat.
And great job with the names.
Nudimud, his own equal. Nudimud was the champion among his fathers, profoundly discerning, wise, of robust strength, very much stronger than his father's begetter Ansar. He had no rival among the gods, his brothers. The divine brothers came together. Their clamor got loud, throwing Tiamat into a turmoil. They jarred the nerves of Tiamat.
Okay. So what are we getting here? This is actually we get this so much in the Torah, especially in Genesis, right? Usually kind of at the beginning of the Parsha. So-and-so was the son of so-and-so who begot so-and-so, and so-and-so lived for X amount of years, and they begot so-and-so, right? But who are these beings we're talking about in Enuma Elish here? Are they humans? No, these are
Nope.
gods,
The
right?
gods.
Right? So, right, gods are giving birth to other gods. Can we keep any of this in our narrative? What do we think?
Some of it is certainly has a theme that seems familiar in terms of you know sibling rivalry and
Mhm.
and struggle of power between one generation and the next.
Absolutely right. So in the Jewish text tradition, right, we take all of those juicy family dynamics, right, and you see this in the Greek and Roman pantheon. You see this in the Hindu pantheon, right? The gods' family dynamics are meant to mirror the difficulties that we have with our own families, right, and our own relationships. So, right, in Jewish tradition, we take all of these juicy stories about the gods and we bring them down, literally down to earth, right, and they become a Genesis narrative, right? Jacob and Esau, right? Joseph and his brothers, right? But what we're seeing here, right, is a genealogy. Okay, we get that a lot in the Torah. But to kind of give you the meta context, right, the historical context. So what's happening here is that someone is making a theological argument that the new generations of gods are much better than the old gods, right? So what we get here, and what I didn't lead with because I think it's nice to throw it in there as a surprise, is that Enuma Elish itself is an adaptation of a Sumerian creation myth, right? thousands of years before the Empire of Babylon rose, right? So what they're doing here, and the scribes know exactly what they're doing, right? They're saying, we know that you're aware of all of these Sumerian gods and all of these Sumerian tales, but ours are now going to supersede, right? The new gods, the sons, the children of your gods are even more powerful, right? So this causes a problem, right? It bothers Tiamat, who's one of the original gods, and for a long time, the primary goddess, right, of this region, right? So for the Sumerians, they worshipped the feminine, right? They worshipped motherhood and the ability to create. And around the time of Hammurabi, right, who's famous for the Hammurabi Code, right, eye for an eye, all of that stuff, he really brought Babylon into the empire that it became, right? Before it was a city, eventually it became more of an empire. And he had this idea that we needed to do away with the feminine, right? So in this story, the newer gods are making Tiamat very angry, right? So then we get this whole tablet, a war between the gods that I'm not going to include here because it has nothing to do with the Jewish creation myth at all, right? But basically what happens is Tiamat gathers together with the older gods. She appoints a champion named Kingu, who will come up a little later, and they fight, okay? And eventually, this guy who is referred to as Nudimud will be called Marduk, okay? And Marduk, right, we're kind of looking at it in hindsight, right? Marduk was the primary deity of the Babylonian Empire. So this text, right, is a way to set Marduk ahead of all the other gods, right? Because we're not quite at monotheism yet, right? We're still in this period of polytheism where, yeah, it's okay that other gods exist as long as our God is stronger than your God, right? Judaism will change that. So let's we're actually, I'm looking at the time, we're actually going to skip ahead a little bit, okay? So this section that I'm scrolling past describes how Marduk is elevated, right? We have given you kingship over the sum of the whole universe, right? We're getting to this point where we have like a real primary god. And in this battle, Marduk slays Tiamat and Tiamat's assembly disperses, okay? Now we're getting back to creation. Let's read 37. Could I throw it back to Susie?
Sure. Sorry, it's just a very small text, so I'm
Oh, I'm sorry.
focusing.
Here, I will let me
If you can enlarge it, that'll be amazing. Amazing. Okay.
And I do just a brief warning, and I really did trim this down. The ancient Babylonian myths are very bloody, frankly, quite disgusting. And especially in this case, right, there is this element of violence against women. So I do want to just kind of prepare everyone for that.
Mm-hmm.
So this is following the great cosmic battle of Marduk and Tiamat.
He split Tiamat into two, like a dried fish. One half of her he set up and stretched out as the heavens. He stretched the skin and appointed a watch, with the instruction not to let her waters escape. Okay,
I'm going to pause you there, Susie. What do we see here? Oh, what is going on with the balloons? How did that happen? I don't know. So what's going on here? Are we seeing anything that we can latch onto in terms of our own creation myth?
Sure, the separation of the heavens and what's below.
Exactly.
And there are waters involved.
Yes, exactly. And not just waters, but right, waters that can be contained by some kind of barrier, right? Like they really believed that there was like bodies of water, right? So bodies of water, right? Exactly. Okay. Bryna, you want to take from tablet 5:1?
Tablet 5, okay. Marduk fashioned heavenly stations for the great gods and set up constellations, the patterns of the stars. He established the heavenly station of Nibiru to fix the stars' intervals, that none should transgress or be slothful. He created Nanar, entrusting to him the night. He appointed him as the jewel of the night to fix the days, and month by month, without ceasing he elevated him with a crown, saying, "Shine over the land at the beginning of the month, resplendent with horns to fix 6 days. On the 7th day, the crown will be half size. On the 15th day, halfway through each month, stand in opposition. When Shamash sees you on the horizon, diminish in proper stages and shine backwards."
What are we reading about here? What do we have?
The moon.
The moon, right? Okay, we've got the establishment of the moon, right? And of course, because we're in this monotheistic, right, where everything, all the heavenly bodies, right, they all have personalities. They're all connected to a god, right? So it's Nanar, right, is the moon. We have, right, we have stars in the sky. Yeah.
And something
then what do
about days. There was something about fixing the days, like of
Yes.
time.
So
The 7th day.
what does this remind you of right here?
Well, am I unmuted? Yeah, all the
Yeah.
times in our Tanakh where it talks about the fixing of the holidays and the cycle of the moons and the Rosh Chodesh and all of those things.
Exactly. And what happens on the 7th day?
Ah,
The crown will be half size, so perhaps a hint at the day of rest.
A hint at the day of rest. Exactly. Exactly. So, right, we're kind of seeing how these ideas could be pulled out, right? They're not necessarily in the same order, right? They weren't quite that blatant, right? And then this part just really tickles me because it shows not just an adaptation of mythology, but also of language. What does this say? Can someone read this back to me? 19.
And also, I mean, it was interesting when Shamash sees you on the horizon, diminish in the proper stages and shine backwards. So Shamash, Shemesh, sun.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. It's from the same root, right? We the ancient languages, right? They all come from certain root languages, right? So before Aramaic and Hebrew, we had Akkadian, right? Which is what a lot of these are translated from. So it's likely that Shamash, is a loaner word, right? And it's not just a loaner word, and we don't really get this in this text. Shamash is a god, right? Is the sun god. So yeah, so we get that. So let's keep going. 54, 55. I'm just going to read this one. He opened the abyss, and it was sated with water. From her 2 eyes, he let the Euphrates and Tigris flow. Okay, so we've got more water. We've got specific river names. Okay, those are going to come up in a little bit. Can someone take 56 to 62?
He looked,
Oh, go ahead, Robin.
he blocked her nostrils, but left. He heaped up the distant mountains on her breasts. Thus the half of her he stretched out and made it firm as the earth.
What do we have here? Where's the parallel?
Creation of land.
And
And air.
Exactly. So, and the air, right? So he's separating water and land, right? Heaven and water. Okay, and now we're getting to the final act of creation. When Marduk, right? Marduk is our main Babylonian guy. When Marduk heard the god's speech, he conceived a desire to accomplish clever things. He opened his mouth addressing Ea. Okay, here's an example of the scribes forgot to change a name. Okay, Ea is also related to Marduk. Okay, and to Apsu, right? So it just shows that they all emerged out of this kind of a similar idea. He opened his mouth, he counsels that which he had pondered in his heart. He says, I will bring together blood to form bone. I will bring into being Lulu, whose name shall be man. I will create Lulu, man. Kingu, and Kingu is the champion of Tiamat, right? Kingu is the one who instigated warfare, who made Tiamat rebel and set the battle in motion. They bound him, holding him before Ea. They inflicted the penalty on him and severed his blood vessels. From his blood, he created mankind. Okay, what can we keep? What can we throw away from that? If we're creating a Jewish creation myth.
The creation of the first human being, certainly, Adam,
Mm-hmm.
and the connection with the female in somehow bringing forth life, even if it's in this bloody, violent manner. But
Yes,
we keep a little
yes.
of the bloody, violent manner in childbirth, so it's not that far off.
Right, exactly. So, right, we've got in right, the Jewish story, right? We would not have Marduk consulting with other gods, right?
Mm-hmm.
We would have a single god making a decision, right? And right, we also get from this that the human beings had to be formed from some material that already existed in the universe, right? That we just didn't pop into being, right? We came from something or from someone. Okay. So now we're going to look at the parallels explicitly. Okay. And you all were so spot on. So I'm just going to point out a few of these interesting parallels before we move on to our second part. Right. So we already talked about how closely Genesis 1:1 matches, right, this early part of tablet 1. Right. In the beginning, when God created heaven and earth, the earth being unformed and void, with darkness over the surface of the deep and a wind from God sweeping over the water. Right. And the date that I'm using for this is based on the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? It's certainly possible and likely that the stories existed well before, right? But we have to, go based on the evidence, right? And the Dead Sea narrative or Genesis fragments are the oldest that we have to look at. So then, right, as you can see, I did a little ... when there wasn't really anything to match up. And then when we get to the actual, right, so we have the war and then we actually get to creation. Okay. We have, right, as you guys pointed out, the splitting of the heavens, water from water, right? Creation of the sky, right? Marduk fashioned heavenly stations and set up constellations. God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate day from night. They shall serve as signs for the set times, the days and the years, and they shall serve as lights in the expanse of the sky to shine upon the earth, right? And we get the creation of sun and moon. This is a direct lift here, okay? From her eyes, right? They're talking about how water came out of Tiamat's eyes. I know this is wild stuff, right? Right, and then we get in Genesis, right? And this is something I'm not really going to touch on because it's a whole other can of worms, right? We actually have 2 creation narratives in Genesis. Really, really fascinating. So I'm pulling pieces from both, right? And that's why we're jumping around, right? It becomes 4 branches. The name of the 3rd river is Tigris, and the 4th river is the Euphrates. Then we get the creation of land. And here I actually think that, right, we get these are from the two separate narratives, right? Kind of the two instances of the creation of humans, right? We have God saying, right, I think this is a good idea, right? Which we have here. And then in the second narrative, right, is when God creates man or humans out of something that already exists, right? The dust of the earth, right? And God blows into the nostrils the breath of life. The human became a living being. So that is all to say, right? It is not a direct one-to-one adaptation, right? But there's simply, and you know, the scholarship agrees, there's simply too many there are too many overlaps, right? For it to have been coincidental, right? And we also know, right, that at some point there was a large group of Jews, Jewish writers, right, learned Jews who were exiled to where?
Babylonia.
Bologna.
Babylonia, right? We didn't exist in a vacuum, right? We never have. Okay, so how are we doing on time here? 12:37. Great. So I'm going to give you because this isn't a storytelling workshop, right? I'm not going to tell the stories as I would kind of tell them if we were working on our storytelling. I'm just going to give you kind of the framework of the story so we can understand kind of the bits and pieces and how they function. So when I was in rabbinical school, which was not that long ago, I was asked to give an iyun, which is kind of an intention setting, right? Before the mourner's Kaddish. And I said, well, man, that's pretty heavy. You know, and my first instinct is, what stories can I tell? What stories do we have in our tradition that can speak to this moment, right, of pain and grief and loss? And I was talking to a classmate and they said, you know, I remember this story that I read. They were a philosophy major in undergrad. And I think it was a Buddhist story, but it was really good. And so they found it for me. And this is what's called Kisa Gotami. It's a very short story. So I'm going to tell this story. And actually, do we have the link to this in the chat?
Yes.
So if you want to click on that link, you'll actually have editing privileges on this document. And what I love is as I'm telling these stories, right, go ahead and click the sticky note and it'll create a little note, right? You can resize however you'd like. So as I'm going, try and think of these three things. What's the premise, right? What's the setup? What's the conflict? And what's the takeaway? What's the lesson, right? So I'll start with I'll delete this as well. Okay. So I'll start with Kisa Gotami. So Kisa Gotami is about, oh, I lost my, hold on 1 second, folks. Lost my tab here. Okay. So Kisa Gotami is a young woman. And when her son was 1 year old, he fell sick and he died. And she was struck by this incredible, unimaginable grief, right? As we can, you know, barely comprehend the pain of what it must feel like to lose a child. So she takes her child in her arms and she runs into town and begging anyone that she sees, please help me. There must be a way to bring my child back. And no one had any answers. But eventually she comes upon the Buddha. She reaches the Buddha, and the Buddha says, Kisa, there is one way to solve your problem. Go and find me 4 or 5 mustard seeds. Find them from any family in which there has never been a death. So Kisa is filled with this renewed hope, right? She has a fix for her problem. She just has to find one house, one family that hasn't experienced death. And if she collects those mustard seeds, somehow the Buddha will make it so that her son is brought back. But as she goes from house to house, she soon realizes that there isn't a family that hasn't been touched by death. And it's at that point that she understands that the Buddha wanted her to realize that death is inevitable. And once Kisa had accepted that fact, her grieving would lessen and eventually stop. So she went and she buried her child. And the story ends with Kisa returning to the Buddha to become one of his students. So this is the story that my friend told me. And there were so many parts of it that I loved, right? I loved this idea of, right, what's the one thing that we all want when someone has passed away? We want a magic fix. We want them back, right? Totally universal. We can all connect to that in some way. Whether or not you've lost a child or a friend or family member, parent, right? That feeling is universal. And I also loved that little piece about how she went around to her community to ask for help, right? Something stuck out there that she had a mission, right? But then I got to the end. And the lesson is, right, as you all wrote, right? Death is inevitable. And to me, as a prelude to Kadishatom, to the mourner's Kaddish, it didn't feel very Jewish to me. It felt a little cold. And so I thought, what if I can take pieces of this? What if I can take the premise, right, that a person has lost someone and that they have a deep, deep wish to bring this person back, and that they go to their community for help, and their spiritual leader provides them with some kind of mission. So I started writing, and this is what I came up with. Came up with the story, and this, we're now going to move to the other side, to a rainy day tale. Okay. There was a woman who had just lost her husband, just a couple weeks shy of their first wedding anniversary. And her friend, upon realizing that this person didn't show up for work as she usually does, went to her house to check on her. She comes in and sees the woman sitting on the floor, cradling her husband's body. And they cry together. And the friend pleads, please help me. What can I do? It's not fair. It's not time. I want him back. And the friend doesn't have any answers, but they think to themselves, or they think aloud, if anyone's going to have the answers in our community, it's the rabbi. Let's go to the rabbi and seek the rabbi's advice, right? So the two run off to the rabbi's house. They enter the rabbi's house, and the rabbi says, I understand. I hear what you need. And there is a way. There's one way. I want you to go to every house in the village, house by house. And at every house, ask them if they've lost someone. If they haven't, ask them for a piece of bread. Eat the piece of bread, and your husband will be back. So the woman is filled with incredible purpose. She runs out of the rabbi's house, goes to the first house in the village, knocks on the door, asks her question, have you lost anyone? And they find out that, well, this first person had lost a nephew just a couple months before. And they look at this poor woman who at this point is standing in the middle of a torrential downpour, soaked to the bone, right? And he says, you know what? I can't help you. But what I can do is walk by your side. So he grabs an umbrella, opens the umbrella, and with the woman walks to the next house. And every single house that they come to across the entire village, right, they find they've lost parents, children, spouses. No one's able to provide the help that she thought that she needed. But at every house, the person says, I can't help you, but I can walk alongside you, right? So at the end of the story, you imagine a procession of umbrellas, right? The entire village is walking behind this woman, and they come to the last house, and that house is the woman's house. And the woman opens the door to her home, and her village streams past her. Some begin preparing the husband for burial, others clean, others cook. And it's at that moment that the woman realizes the lesson that the rabbi was seeking to impart, right? It's true. No one is spared the pain of loss, but it's in community that we find healing. It's in community that we find our answers, right? It's in community that we find comfort. And that's a rainy day tale. So let's take a look, right? We've got, okay, premise, loss of husband early in marriage, right? Conflict, they have to find a house without loss. And then the lesson, right? Community brings comfort, and walking together with one in pain helps to comfort the mourner. So why imagine I called the rabbi the mayor. What's Jewish about this story? What makes it a Jewish adaptation?
First, you have food, bread.
Mm-hmm.
Life can't
Yeah,
be
that
without
was
bread.
exactly that was right. In Kamal Torah, right? No bread, no Torah, no bread, no life, right?
And there's also
So
water.
that was
Yeah, and water, the rain, like the renewal. Like you have to go through the rain of tears to find others and walking together in the rain under the umbrella, under the shelter of the umbrella.
Yeah, it's like an immersion of sorts, right? Right, almost mikveh-esque.
I also was struck then with the specific tasks that the community takes, and those parallel, of course, the tasks that we take halakhically when someone dies in our community. So tending to the body, tending to the needs of the family, etc. So
Exactly. Yeah, so it's really a story about why Shiva matters, right? And so, and right, this is the example that I can bring from, my own life, my own experience adapting. But I think it really goes to show that right, when we look to other traditions, right, let me flip that. When we only look to our tradition, right, it's easy to get stuck, right? It's easy to rely on the same handful of stories over and over, right? And it's when we look outside, right? When we kind of look outside of our door, right, into the world around us, that we find bits of inspiration, right? So I was inspired by this Buddhist story. But what came out of it was not another Buddhist story, but a Jewish story, right? but I needed that inspiration. I needed that to spur the creation of a what I consider to be a modern myth, right? Okay. Any questions or thoughts on this before we move on to our final activity, when we'll actually get to try our hands at a little adaptation?
I'm just curious, Ben, if when you did that exercise for, for introducing Kaddish, did you tell the Buddhist story first, or did you just tell the new story?
So I told the new story, but I introduced it as this is a story adapted from a Buddhist tale, right? Because what's very important in our tradition, naming your sources. Got to do it.
Nice.
No chat GPT for us.
That's right. That's right. Although I am, and maybe this is like a whole other class. I am really fascinated by Chat GPT, and I actually think that I've played around with it, and what I've realized is that the only way that you can get anything of quality out of it is if you engage in relationship with it, which is so weird to think about, right? But like, if you tell it, all right, prepare me 5 discussion questions on the miracle of Hanukkah, right? It's going to give you like, what was the miracle of Hanukkah? How long did the oil last? Right? Things like that. Now go back in. Okay, you've written me these questions. ChatGPT, could you contextualize them within modern Jewish history? ChatGPT, could you pull out, right, this theme, right? You have to coach it, right? You have to have a conversation with it. And even then, right, the stuff that it comes out with is not perfect, right? It's still very obviously created by AI. But I think that there's something there. It's a sermon that I'm going to give like 5 years down the line or something.
Absolutely. I think I learned about ChatGPT when I had assigned to a group of 7th graders Pirkei Avot, and they needed to pick a part, chapter and verse that they really resonated with them, and they needed to tell me what it says, what others have said about it, and then their own personal view on it. And I had 3 of them come back almost identical about what Pirkei Avot is, ethics of. I'm like, where did they pull this from? And that was just at the very beginning of ChatGPT.
Yeah.
Which then lends itself to the lesson of, we in Judaism always quote our sources. And how can you quote ChatGPT?
Yeah. Yes. It's huge, right, kind of like essential conflict for us as Jewish scholars and teachers. So Chat GPT aside, let's with our last few minutes, let's try and make a little myth for ourselves. So I've done a little of the work ahead of time of breaking down the George Washington cherry tree story. It's very short. If you don't know it, it's this, right? A young George Washington gets a new hatchet for his birthday, and he uses it right away to cut down his father's prized cherry tree. His father comes back. His father's very angry, and he asks, George, did you cut down that cherry tree? And famously, George Washington says, I cannot tell a lie. I cut it with my hatchet. And the father says, oh, your honesty is worth 1,000 cherry trees, right? Okay, so spoiler, this story never happened, right? It was actually created whole cloth by an author, journalist actually, who was writing kind of a book of George Washington myths almost. This was after George Washington had died, right? But we're still using, they use this myth as part of nation building, right? So, right, what are the elements of each of these, right? We have our future president who's using a hatchet to cut a cherry tree. His father becomes angry at the destruction, and he is surprised by George's honesty. So when we're talking about adaptation, right, we're not just talking about how can we come up with something fresh for the sake of coming up with something fresh, right? It's also a matter of making things relevant, right? Actually, the kind of inspiration for my capstone project was that my wife and I got married in my second year of rabbinical school. And, I start thinking about children and future generations. And I start thinking, what's it going to be like to tell a story about the wise men of Chelm to my children who don't have grandparents who still speak a little Yiddish and who have no lived context for shtetl life or right any of that Yiddishkeit that is so apparent in those stories. Well, we have to adapt, right? We take what's good, we take what works, and we adapt it into a modern context. So I'd love if we could, right, try and imagine we're trying to teach a lesson about honesty. Okay. How can we use this story to kind of map an adaptation on it for one of your students today, right? One of your Gen Z, TikTok, kids, right? So let's try it. So yellow, we can come up with some premises, right? Doesn't have to be George Washington, right? Who would be a more relevant main character to our kids today?
Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift, exactly. Okay, so immediately, right, we have our main character, Taylor Swift. Excellent. Okay, and right, let's keep with the framework of a birthday gift. What is something that Taylor receives for her birthday that could be used in a destructive manner? Something that the kids would understand, right? They've never chopped trees or chopped wood with a hatchet.
A new
Right.
guitar. Maybe
Sorry,
a new
I heard a new
guitar.
guitar. Okay. She gets a new guitar. And then Brian, did you have one?
I thought an iPhone,
No. Easier to
She gets an
break.
iPhone.
because I mean that's what this age group would, resonate with.
Totally. Okay.
Go with the iPhone.
So how can she create let's stick with the iPhone since we're like really trying to, right?
Yeah.
So how can the iPhone be destructive?
Social media, post
Mhm.
on social media.
And she posts something
Excellent.
destructive to a friend or to others.
Okay. So she posts something, right, that is mean or inappropriate, right? And how can we use this, right? Let's maybe bring her parent into it, right? How can we use this to talk about honesty?
Parent really.
I was thinking more, I was thinking maybe her bodyguard who's serving in the IDF and she says something blasphemous about Israel right now. Just to really
Oh,
bring it into the 6th and 7th
Wow.
grader mindset.
okay. So we've got this bodyguard element. So the bodyguard approaches her and says, "Did you really post this?" And what could Taylor's response be?
I think she needs to acknowledge, yes, it was actually my social media manager who posted it. My content manager.
That's what she could say, right?
Yes. Or she could
That would
say,
be a
yes,
way to weasel out of it.
Or
Yep.
she
Or she could say-
she could own up to having said something without really researching and looking deeper into the facts of the situation. I think that would be a kind of apology that
Mm,
has basis in what generationally is happening out there, is lack of evidence and information and quick posts that can somehow be damaging.
So, and then the bodyguard can say, right, it really hurt me that you posted that, but your honesty has renewed my trust in you, right? Revealed to me that you're a person that can, right, that I can rely on to do work, right? And the fact that you owned up to your mistake, right?
But then I would want to see another piece come after that, which is the tshuva. You know, it's not enough to recognize having made this painful, potentially destructive post, but maybe a commitment to making it right in some way.
I
Whatever
love that.
that
That's
might
such a
be.
Jewish value of teshuvah, that we allow for someone to make a
Yeah.
mistake and learn from it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So like, right, we see how even if, right, we're adapting, we can.
Did he?
Sorry, I was
Yeah.
sorry for a second. And I also realized we're over our time now. But how easy and how impactful can be.
I am going to cut Ben off since he's freezing anyway, and I'm going to apologize profusely that that's how we have to end. But really, I thought this was just a very generative, interesting session, and I do hope, especially for Bryna, who you do teach graders, you could bring this into classrooms. And so obviously all kinds of implications for working with educators. And I do want to just bring your attention, we put a link into the chat for a little evaluation form. And our next session is on January 9th with Rabbi Dr. Ellie Holzer, who many of us know and love, and it should be a really interesting session. And I'm so sorry Ben got kicked out, or no, he's coming back. So just, and I really, you know, when we started, Ben said, oh, it's okay if it'll be a small group, it'll be very intimate and we'll have a real good learning opportunity. And I think that played out beautifully. So I just want to thank everybody. And I thank you, Ben. Sorry that technical difficulties at the
sorry, guys.
very end.
I apologize.
All right, but thank you so much. Okay.
It was great. I thank you so much. It was really quite education. I loved how you pulled it together. So Yasher Koach.
Good. Thank you. It was fun. And also just to give
Thank you.
permission that we can adapt stories and make them work for our setting. This is validating.
Yep, and it'll be recorded. It is recorded and will be on our website. So please share it with colleagues and friends, and really, and Ben will be giving me the text, so we'll send those out when we send the recording and all that. Thank you. Enjoy the end of Hanukkah. Enjoy the upcoming winter vacation, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.